Good to see you all. So like he said, I'm Rachel McCrickard, actually about to be Rachel Ledbetter. I'm going back to my maiden name when my divorce is final in 2 weeks, and I'm very excited about that. If you are not divorced, you should consider it. It's like, I highly recommend it, 10 out of 10. It's a great decision. So a little bit about me, kind of like Steve said, I'm the CEO and co-founder of Motivo, also a licensed marriage and family therapist. I started Motivo to solve a problem that I experienced on my own road to licensure, which was lack of access to a clinical supervisor. I'm from a rural area of North Georgia, right under Chattanooga, Tennessee, and when I was working towards my license, the closest supervisor lived in Atlanta, 2 hours away, so I was driving 4 hours round trip to get to my closest clinical supervisor. At that time, supervision had to be face-to-face. Stuck with it, got licensed, but then I noticed that states started changing their rules to allow virtual supervision, and that's what gave me the idea to start Motivo. Today I live in Knoxville, Tennessee with my very cute pup, Wrigley, who I got in the divorce, and I put my proudest achievement as being accidentally on Girls Gone Wild, so I'll just tell a quick story about that. I was raised very religious. I went to school at Milligan College in Johnson City, Tennessee, and my major was Bible. That's an actual major. And so my girlfriends and I went on spring break down to Miami. It was a great place for Christian girls. We did not know what we were doing. We went on a booze cruise and drank Sprite. And then we got free tickets like Senor Frogs or something like that. And we walk in there and there's like all these lights and cameras. I did not know what Girls Gone Wild was. They kept filming us and we were like, what do they want us to do? And then I looked around at some of the things that the other girls were doing and I was like, oh, this is not the place for us. So there might be some like outtakes of me somewhere in a Girls Gone Wild video. I am uncertain about how to wear a graduation cap. I love this picture of me. I'm just like super clueless that my graduation cap is on backwards in this picture. So that's just like a little bit about me. Let me talk to you a little bit about why it's so important to solve this clinical supervision problem. I think this is a staggering statistic. 57% of the people who get a master's degree in counseling or social work never complete their licensure. So at a time when we don't have enough mental health clinicians, we're losing over half of the available supply of therapists before they even get started. These numbers have continued on with this same trend for about the last 20 years. And you can see some of the reasons here that people drop out of the process. I always like to point out like the 1.6 that left because the profession wasn't a good fit for them. Almost everything else is solvable problems. I often say we use our greenest clinicians to serve the most vulnerable populations, the Medicaid populations. I see a lot of nodding heads. Like it's absolutely kind of like a hazing ritual that we put new clinicians through in their first few years, and they have a very difficult time, getting through that. I'll call out one of our partners, Triad here. Also, people have a lot of difficulty passing the licensure exam. There's even some bias in the licensure exams that have come out in the last couple of years. So we partner with Triad to help with that. That was good, right? Okay, good. So let me just tell you a little bit more about how I started Motivo. I already said to solve a problem I experienced on my own road to licensure. I don't have any background in tech, no experience whatsoever. I just figured this is an idea and I'll give it a try. I created an MVP, which is called a minimum viable product. Through Shopify. I just uploaded a bunch of supervisor profiles. This is what it looked like 7 years ago when I first started the company, and it started to grow from there. Still, I don't have any clue what I'm doing though. But today, 28 amazing employees, about 1,200 clinical supervisors across all 50 states. We're delivering virtual clinical supervision to about 200 behavioral health companies, and we've helped over 6,000 therapists obtain licensure. We've also raised about $25 million in venture funding, and that's something I'm going to talk about today because it's relevant to how to, kind of maintain your authentic voice as a clinician while also getting the resources that you need to grow a company. So here's the things I want to accomplish today. I want to talk about how to develop content that resonates with your audience. The main role that I play for Motivo today is to kind of be the voice of the customer, the voice of the supervisor, the voice of the pre-licensed clinician, those types of things. So I try to make sure that that is always like a running thread through what we do. How to build a product that centers the needs of clinicians, and how to find investors, board members, employees that align with your mission. One quick disclaimer, I already said my undergrad's in Bible, so I have 0 experience or formal education in marketing, so this might be helpful or might not be helpful, so, blame Steve for picking this presentation if it's not helpful. So how to develop content that resonates with your audience. When in the early days of Motivo, I was in every single interaction with supervisors and clinicians, and I was like pairing them together, and it was only me, and so I just could stay very close to the needs of our clinicians. But as the company started to grow, I lost that a little bit, and I didn't have as much of a direct impact, direct access to the clinicians that we were serving. So I started writing this thing called Mondays with Motivo, which is kind of like my weekly blog on Substack. And it has been very successful in the sense that people seem to really resonate with it. And so I feel like I kind of earned a right there to talk a little bit about like what I did with that made it successful. One of my first things that I wanted to do was like never talk about Motivo from a selling perspective. And I think a lot of times on a blog post, you end with some sort of ask about click here to download this or do this or something like that. And I just didn't want to do that. I wanted to make it very authentically me and my voice. I wanted to give something and like never ask for anything back. I love that phrase about attraction, not promotion, that's in the recovery community, that I just wanted to make it be something that people wanted to open and read every week and not something that they felt like they were constantly getting things promoted. And that has gone really well. So for me, I am the audience that I'm talking to. I don't talk to them like I'm an expert. I always talk to them like I'm a peer. I find that resonates a lot. I think it's very disarming for people to know that like you're struggling with the same things that they are. I know anytime my therapist says to me, like, if she discloses anything that she has struggled with on her own personal journey, it's just like a little piece of like, I'm not alone in this. There's a C.S. Lewis quote that says, what you too, I thought I was the only one. And it's kind of that idea of like, we're all going through similar struggles and journeys, and when you can kind of make that real for people, I find that people resonate. Be humble. Therapists can sniff out BS, like if you have like some sort of like ego or narcissism or anything like that that's coming across, like therapists will notice that and recognize it. They'll probably have like a little bit too high of a radar for those types of things. So I find that humility is like really important. And then be human. People resonate with vulnerability and authenticity. I just have to say, like the title of this, literally Incapable of Small Talk, is a phrase that I came up with simply because I have a really hard time at giving small talk. Like I just, even at a bar, I'm like, what do people talk about in a bar? I'm like, how's your relationship with your father? Was like the first question I asked a guy in the bar the other night. And I was like, I don't know what else to talk about. What do you talk about? But I think that, in the business context, one of the things I've learned the hard way is that, you have to be careful about how much you say and that you don't want to ostracize your audiences. That's something that I constantly am thinking about. And my team always tells me, like, Rachel, stay away from sex and drugs and religion and politics. So those are my favorite subjects. But I try to like stay away from those. And then be a learner. I always end Mondays with Motivo with like, what do you think about this? Like, I would love to hear your thoughts on how you've experienced this. And I always get tons of responses back of people saying, like, this is what I've learned. And I think it just kind of, again, like disarms people and is like, oh, she wants to hear back from me too. She's not just talking at us, like she's talking with us. And then use what you have. So my Mondays with Motivo is very much a homily style. I put kind of like a sermon, if you can think of it like that. I think I come by that honestly, both from my background in theology, but also my mom is like a author for Chicken Soup for the Soul. If you wonder like who are the people behind that, it's like my mom, who's like in Ringgold, Georgia in her house coat, like surrounded by miniature sheep that she collects, and she's writing stories all the time for Chicken Soup for the Soul. And really they all kind of follow the same format, which is like tell a story that's enjoyable or relatable and then make a point about it. And so that's kind of what a sermon is too, right? It's like taking any kind of script or scripture or something like that and then making a point about it. So that is the content that has worked for me, and hopefully you pick up a few tips about what you could do, learning, kind of what you have. So how to build a product that centers the needs of clinicians. I'm going to try to leave time for questions too in case anybody has them. So I'll try to get through this as quickly as possible so that we have time for that. So building a product that centers the needs of clinicians. Paul Graham, so there's a very well-known accelerator program. If you're not familiar with like startup lingo, startups can go through when they're just in the ideation phase. They have an idea and they want to see if it's like has any potential, and they can sign up for something called an accelerator program. Like the three most well-known are Y Combinator in San Francisco, Techstars, which has many locations. We went through Techstars in 2018, and then Startup School. There's like several different ones. Y Combinator is the most famous and the most successful. So like Airbnb and DoorDash and Dropbox and Instacart, Stripe, all those companies came out of Y Combinator. And so Paul Graham was talking to a class of Stanford students in the entrepreneurship program, and they asked him, like, how do we come up with our idea for a great startup? Like, we want to be, rich and famous, and we want to start like $1 billion company. Like, how do we do that? And he said, you're approaching this the wrong way. You need to learn a trade and then find out what are the problems that exist within that industry. And, accidentally, that's definitely what I did, in the sense that, like, because I'm a clinician, I could very easily see the problems that exist within our own industry. And I would just offer that to you, in the sense that clinicians are really the best people to solve the problems in our industry. There aren't a lot of mental health startups that have a clinician on the founding team, unfortunately. And that oftentimes leads to clinicians not being centered when they're thinking about how to build the company. So I think that we have to be the ones to kind of take that reign and say, I know that this is a problem, I experience that this is a problem, and I have a solution that I think can help with that. That said, I will say that timing is everything with startups. Motivo, I think almost every founder I know works the same level of hard. They all want their companies to succeed. Timing and luck is really everything. Motivo probably wouldn't exist today without the pandemic. It pushed all virtual clinical supervision rules to 100%. Before that, it was very much like sparse throughout the country. It obviously increased the needs of mental health clinicians. It put more strain on mental health, the mental health clinician shortage. All of those things were things that I couldn't have predicted or anything like that, and obviously it was like a horrible thing that happened for society. But just because it's a good idea doesn't mean that it's like something that you should start if you're thinking about starting a company. And I say that mainly because you could be 2 years too early, you could be 2 years too late. In fact, I can tell you right now, one of the things, mental health startups are actually very difficult to get funding for mental health startups today, and that's particularly because the market got absolutely saturated with it during COVID. And I know that this isn't really the kind of point of today's session, so let me just put a pin in that, but I'm happy to answer any questions about that if anyone wants to know. Couple of recommendations I'll make. There's a great book called The Mom Test. That's really good for customer discovery, and this is really good for anything. So not just startups, but it's good for private practices. It's good for really just identifying your target market, and kind of the idea behind the mom test is that your mom's going to tell you anything is great. So what are the questions that you can ask that dig a little deeper, that really get the feedback from potential users or customers or clinicians of your product or service that would help them know if it's actually something worth building. There's also a really great product market fit survey that was started by the founder of Superhuman, an email platform, and I linked to that as well. At the end here, I don't know, do you guys have access to the slides? I don't know, do you? No one knows. So I just put my email at the end of this, and if you want any copies of these slides, you can just shoot me an email. I'd be happy to send it to you. Never stop talking to clinicians. So that's the one thing I've always kept as part of my job description is at least 3 calls a week with our clinical supervisors to just hear directly from them what they think, all of that sort of stuff. And I'll tell you, that is something that has changed throughout the years. As a new startup, there was a lot more excitement about virtual clinical supervision and all of that sort of stuff. Clinicians are a little annoyed with tech today. They're kind of more frustrated. They have more opinions and more frustrations with it. They feel like they've been dealt a bad hand by mental health companies, and they definitely have. And so some of the feedback is different today, and it's something that I want to continue to listen for. Another big inflection point I would say for Motivo, I brought on a co-founder 2 or 3 years after I started the company, mainly because I didn't know how to build a product. I didn't really know what technology could help solve, and the product was not that great in the early days. It was very much driven by spreadsheets and manual processes, so many manual processes, and anytime that I would have too much work for one person that was doing a manual process, my solution was just hire another person and give them more manual processes, and I didn't really realize how much technology could help there. And so I think, I was listening to CJ's presentation around HubSpot, which I think is so good to think about all the tools and services that are out there to streamline processes and make things, faster and better. Oftentimes clinicians don't know about all of those. And so bringing on great product people is a great decision. And this last tip that I have is around how to find investors and board members that align with your mission. So if you want to talk about, capital or anything like that, I don't really know how much, in these audiences there are that people who have ideas for companies or are starting companies. But what I did was I took out a home equity line of credit on my house for $37,000, and that's what I used to start Motivo in the early days. But there's venture capital gets kind of a bad rap. And for good reason, there's a lot of not great investors out there. I'll tell you that Motivo's investors, they think that they're you are the head of the company and you're the clinician and you know best. They never would ask me to sacrifice quality or clinician, what's best for the clinicians and ultimately their clients in the name of growth, ever. They would never do that. And so there are some great investors out there, and I always say, there's some really good clinicians, and there's some really shitty clinicians, and there's some really good investors and really some shitty ones, so you can't kind of put everybody in the same box there. There's angel investors who are investing their own money. There's venture capitalists who are investing other people's money, think hospital endowments and universities and big, health plans. They're taking that money and investing it in startup. But there's also a section of venture capitalists that are called impact investors. And that just means that they value the impact that you're having on the world as much as they do financial returns. We have a number of impact investors, and I have to report every single quarter on the demographic information of our supervisors and clinicians and how many live in mental health professional shortage areas and all of those sort of things to make sure that we're really serving our mission of creating more clinicians in the areas of the country that need them most. I also say, this is what's a mistake that I definitely made. I pitched a lot to investors, and I got told no a lot, a lot, so many no's. And even the person or the company or the fund that led our Series A was the same fund that led our seed round, which is not usually typical, and that's because nobody else wanted to lead it, and they kind of just had to kind of save us. And my thought was always, when an investor would pass, I would think they see some kind of fatal flaw in the company that I'm just not smart enough to see. But what I learned over time is that I was actually the best person to be representing the needs of clinical supervisors. So there's a lot of reasons that investors pass. Obviously, most investors pass. But I think that if I could go back to that early Rachel that was doing all that pitching, it would be a lot more about just staying committed to our mission and weeding out and finding the right people for Motivo. I'll say also, maybe also don't assume that you know everything. Being a learner in the space is very important. A lot of the reason that people said no to Motivo was because they thought that the market wasn't big enough. And that's the only thing that investors are thinking about is, could this company be worth $1 billion? And if they don't, nobody ever questioned whether or not I was solving a real problem, but a lot of people questioned, how big can this thing get, And so there's a lot of reasons for that, which might be telling for you of whether or not you need or want to raise funding. And this kind of leads to my next point. The wrong investors will probably weed themselves out, because if they want you to grow at all costs, they're going to be looking for your willingness to grow at all costs. And if you don't do that, if you stay very true to your mission, they're not going to want to fund you anyways. The process of raising capital has shifted a little bit, and I think it's in our industry's favor. I'm going to talk a little bit about that on the next slide. And then I also included a link to every investor who's ever invested in a mental health company. It's a list that What If Ventures put together that I like to use. I was like, Rachel, you've like lost the thread here when I did this slide. I was like, this has nothing to do with your original title, but I just thought it was interesting, and I kind of thought that people in this room would be interested as well, mainly because like the main topic that I see on my LinkedIn feed around clinicians is kind of hatred towards venture capital and these big tech companies. And so I just kind of wanted to illuminate some of my learnings here, because the market has shifted significantly in terms of venture funding for mental health companies, and I'll share a little bit why. But so 5 years ago, everybody was getting funding, particularly during the pandemic. You were getting really high valuations. Valuation means that, you know, kind of the price per share that you're selling your equity at. So if, you know, basically making your company as valuable as possible. So you want that, but then at the same time you have to grow into that valuation, which can be very, very, very difficult to do. They're looking for huge market sizes, health plan, employer contracts, all of that type of stuff. The more money you raise and the higher valuation you do it at benefits the investor, not you. I'll just give kind of an example of this. It might have come across your feed in the last week or so, and I'll just kind of call it out, but the name of the company is Brightline. You guys have heard of Brightline? They just did massive layoffs. They shut down operations in 45 states. There's a number of mental health startups. I don't really want to like call out all of them by name, but they are victims of this right here. They raised too much money at too high of a valuation, and they don't have a path to an exit. There's just not enough. There's not enough patients to be had, not enough clinicians to serve them, and there's no buyers for a company like that, because who can afford a $200 billion company? You know, they're like Amazon, like maybe, you know, like there's just like not a path to an exit for most of those. And so it's unfortunate for the founders, because they did what most founders during that day did, which was take the best term sheet that's like the most money at the highest valuation. But now they're kind of underwater, to be honest with you, and it's going to be very difficult for them to like know how to get out of that. And it was really like bad acting from the venture capitalist perspective. They don't really care. You know, contrary to what I said earlier, that Motivo's investors, we've gotten lucky that they care, but most venture capitalists, they benefit off of you having a higher valuation from their own kind of books and processes, and they don't care that these companies are underwater. Growth at all costs, so just like higher, burn cash, grow as quickly as possible, and you don't even think about profitability. Most of the big tech companies out there, think Slack and lots of places like that, they don't even think about profitability. They're just spending and growing. Today, it's a little bit different, at least from what I'm hearing. Investors are looking for real companies that are solving a real problem. They still want unicorns. Unicorns means that you've hit $1 billion valuation. They're still looking for a huge market size, but health plans kind of got inundated with all the different point solutions. Like if you think like Equip for eating disorders, or No CD for OCD, and there's all these different point solutions that says we're going to serve this population through this platform that we just built. Health plans just got inundated with them, and now they're kind of like over it, to be honest with you. They're looking for responsible growth with strong unit economics, so things like growth margin and customer acquisition costs and, you know, customer lifetime value. All of those things matter to them a lot more. You need to have a lot of cash on hand. If you don't have cash on hand, you know, they don't see you as being able to like make it through kind of this market downturn that we've had in the last year or so. And then they want you to demonstrate a path towards profitability. So how are you going to actually become a sustainable company on your own without any help from investors? And it's because of this, it's very, like I talk to a lot of early stage founders in the mental health field. You know, they're always asking like, how did you get this? How did you get this? I'm telling you, it's like so hard for mental health startups right now to get funding because the market just kind of got inundated with it. So it doesn't mean that you have a bad idea, but it's definitely like just a casualty of the current market. So this is just, let me come back to this. This is a little bit about the journey of, you know, what it's been like over the last few years. So I'll go over this if there's like no questions and crickets. But if there isn't crickets and you guys do have questions, I'll take those now. Go ahead. Yeah. Yes. Well, a couple of different ways. I went through an accelerator program in Chattanooga called CoLab. You could, like, usually these accelerator programs take 6% of your equity and fund you $150,000 and then give you kind of everything you need to start your company. Before I did that, I went through a kind of a mini accelerator program that didn't take any equity, didn't give me any money, but they gave me like insight and guidance and that sort of stuff. And there was a guy there who just, angel investor, who's just a wealthy guy, and he was like, I think you have something. He always used to say, it's like a have to have and not a nice to have. Like you have to have clinical supervision to make it through. So he felt like it was something, and he offered me like a $30,000 convertible note, which is, you know, a term sheet for investing, and I didn't know what he was talking about, so I didn't even email him back. And so I found out what it was, and another kind of guy like that, very wealthy guy, gave me $45,000, and then I got into Techstars, so it was $125,000, and then all of these accelerator programs end in like something like a demo day where you pitch to a whole room full of investors, and then like that kind of starts the flywheel a little bit of people being interested. That's for me, yeah. Other questions? Okay, good. I'll go back to this one then. Okay, there it is. Oh, go ahead.
You have one. So as you're scaling, selecting a co-founder can be a really, really hard thing to do, like finding the right person. How did you go about selecting your co-founder or interviewing them and finding the right person, the right fit for you that was kind of the yin to your yang, you know?
Yeah, I mean, I think the thing that I did best was that I waited until well into the company to bring on a co-founder, which like seems odd. It's like, well, he wasn't a co-founder, he wasn't even there in the first couple of years. But I always thought about like writing a children's, you know the children's book, Are You My Mother? You know that children's book? I thought about doing that for like, Are You My Co-Founder? Because I literally asked everybody to be my co-founder. I was like, you know how to do a WordPress site? Can you be my co-founder? And I'm so glad that they all said no. They were like, no, you don't even know what you're doing. I was like, that's valid. And so like, you know, they all passed. Like there was like a marketing person and there was like this like customer service person. I thought just because they lived in New York, they'd probably be a great co-founder. Like, I don't know, you know. So I just got lucky that most of them said no. And then I found Mike, my co-founder. You know, what I would say, one of the biggest lessons that I've learned is to just like be relentless in your, like the work that you put into building something like this. And so I remember that during the pandemic, there was like a list that came out from this investor called Sequoia that was like underrepresented tech talent that had been let go because of the pandemic. And I just went through and like emailed or LinkedIn messaged all of them. And I'm like, I'm looking for a co-founder and this is what I need. And Mike got back to me. He was from Airbnb and he actually felt sorry for me. This is on the, I think 2020 that he joined. He literally came on as a consultant and was like, this poor girl does not know what she's doing, I'm gonna help him. And I just convinced him to stay, and he's like not allowed to leave now. So that's what I did, and it works. And it's also good because in the early days, if I would have done that in the early days, I probably would have split equity 50-50, you know? And like, it's very true for most startups that the founding team doesn't make it all the way through the company. You know, Airbnb had like 3 co-founders and it's only the main one, the CEO, who's still there today. So I always think about this quote that I heard that like sometimes your startup team isn't your scale-up team, and it's very true that like the kind of talent that you need in the beginning stages of the company, and certainly for my company, it's been a different company every single year. I was just talking to my brother yesterday because he works at Marshall's as a manager, and he was saying that his requirement with the store is to grow at 3%, this year. Motivo's grown 200% every year for the last 3 years, so like, doubled in size, and like that's a different company than it was like a couple years ago when we had 5 employees and, maybe 25 B2B customers that we were serving. So I always think about that as well. There's nobody who has been at Motivo from the very beginning, because what you need is different. Okay, so I'll go through these a little. I can barely see them. So enter Techstars Atlanta with the Shopify site and 1 engineer. Met Tim Howe, who became our board member. And then I think they're doing that for me. They just made it bigger. I love that. Oh, now it's full size. Okay, and then pitched at demo day, fundraised for 18 months and got told no a lot. Finally raised $2.2 million in 2019. I cried a lot, I ran a lot. That was kind of like my self-care piece of like, I would always see my run at the end of the day as like part of my job description. Like, it's like the moment that I can kind of like release what's in my brain and really even work on like building the company a little bit during that time. So I kind of hit on this earlier. Everything was manual for a long time. Everything was hard. We were based in Atlanta with 3 employees in 2020 and transitioned to remote. One of the best parts about that, Motivo is a fully remote team, so our 28 employees live all over, is that you can get great talent. Especially if you live in a smaller city, it's great to be able to pick, the best talent from wherever they're coming from. So Mike joined the company because he felt sorry for me, and then he really just started working on the product, and it changed everything for us. So, the head count, the number of employees that we needed to serve our customers has gotten progressively less in turn. We're growing, so we have more people, but the efficiency of their work is so much better because of what product has done. Hit $1 million in revenue, which is kind of like what you need in order to raise a Series A. And then we began seeing a little bit of a momentum in B2B. In the early days, we were very B2C, individuals paying out of pocket for supervision coming to us. Today, we're almost like 80% B2B, so it's mental health companies paying us for clinical supervision and using one of our 1,200 supervisors. 2022, start fundraising Series A, impacts growth because I was the growth leader and the person who fundraised, so that was difficult. Got distracted by market size and shiny objects. This is another problem with venture capital, is because, when they looked at Motivo and they're like, clinical supervision, how hard can that be? How big can that be? Like, we don't see it as like a big market size. So they're like, in order for us to fund you, prove to us all the market adjacencies that you're gonna go after. And so I just spent a lot of time researching like speech and language pathologist supervision and dietitian supervision and all these other things that I know nothing about. And the one thing I learned about them is that they don't pay for supervision. Our industry is the only place where people are required to pay for clinical supervision, or somebody pays. Everybody else just does it as a pay it forward. You have a mentor, they sign off on your hours. And so that, obviously, looking at all those market adjacencies really took time away from growing the company. Got the worst term sheet ever from an investor. It was actually an impact investor. And then Cox Enterprises is our main investor. They saved us with a better term sheet. 2023, solid growth in B2B, right people in the right seats. I was just looking at this out there. I said, in the year, with a full pipeline, scalable product, and all eyes on us. Because this was from a board deck, this slide, and I'm like, how pretentious is it gonna be to stand out there and be like, all eyes are on us, you guys? So I hate that you guys saw that, but that was really targeted to our board members, that a lot of people were looking at Motivo in 2023 to see what we could do. So, long, arduous process. I would say this startup curve, this was created by Paul Graham, same guy I was mentioning earlier from Y Combinator. And when I look at it, I think this is probably relevant to a lot of things. I've actually seen a lot of clinicians who've started some sort of product or service or Slack community or Mighty Networks community or something like that that they're so excited about in the beginning, and then they're like the novelty wears off, right? And then it's like kind of starting the grind of like building something from scratch is just actually really hard, and there is so much luck associated with it that sticking with it is really hard. There's a lot of, 90% of startups fail, so it can just be pretty tough when you're in the trough of sorrow. That's what I got on Celexa, so works for me. Any other questions? Go ahead, Brandon. He's coming.
Thanks, Rich. It's always great to hear you speak. You are very authentic. We are lucky enough to be one of your partners, as you mentioned earlier, and I'm lucky enough to be your friend too. So thanks. I have a question I actually don't know the answer to, even though I have some insights into your business. As you have grown Motivo, how have you made sure that you stay engaged with the marketing, voice to make sure that it's authentic, that it does the things that you had on an earlier slide of the do's and don'ts? Like, what do you actually do in your CEO seat to stay engaged and make sure that Motivo still sounds like you want it to?
Yeah, that's a great question. And, I continue to read any email that goes out to like everybody, mainly because, I have a certain way that I want it to sound. And so it's probably the only area of the company that I kind of micromanage, And so I've just kind of done that intentionally. The company just knows that, like, if you're going to send a mass email out to everybody, that I want to just do a quick read through of it. And usually what I'm doing is like shortening it by half. I put in like tons of spaces, like nobody wants to read a wall of text. Are we talking to them like a real person and like reducing all of the extra stuff that isn't needed? I also get very annoyed with like emails that have tons of asks in them. It's like one ask, like what action are you wanting them to take here? Oftentimes I think that people are trying to be efficient and give the person all the information that they need up front, maybe onboarding a supervisor. I hate that. I would rather receive 3 different emails over the span of 2 weeks that's helping me understand how the platform works than like one email with a whole bunch of like links in it. So I don't know where I picked that up because I didn't learn it in Bible class, but I just try to like just stay involved in that piece of it. Okay, awesome. Thanks so much.